How is TCU going to fix their issues up front? This offensive line has to get better. If this offense is going to take a leap in 2024, that's where it starts up front. What's the plan? We'll talk about it next. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs podcast, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, whatever the case may be. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube, please do that. I've seen kind of a downtick since we hit 1K subscribers, that is, as far as new subscribers go. So if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, it's one really cool way to show that you're engaged. And, I mean, it's just one of the benchmarks that I use to see that people are jumping on the train and want to hear more about TCU athletics. We're going to talk about the offensive line today. So, I feel like with all the issues that TCU football had last year, the O-line and the D-line, in my mind, were the biggest things that you have to shore up and fix really immediately if you're going to get better going into 2024. And so we're going to focus today on the offensive line. Tomorrow, I'll spend a lot of the first segment talking about the defensive line. But I was taking a look at, okay, who are the returning players? Because you're losing a lot. Even though this O-line struggled last year, you're losing a lot of production off of this group. Willis Patrick, who came in from Jackson State, he's going to be gone. John Lands, who started most of the year at center, he'll be gone. Andrew Coker and Brandon Coleman will also be out. And I know there's a lot of folks that are like, well, this seems like a situation where maybe turnover is not a terrible thing because there was a lot of inconsistency up front to begin with. But my big concern is, I said this before the beginning of last season, there with O-line play, you're talking about 5 guys that have to work in concert together as much as possible. So they have to understand their assignments, what everybody's responsibility is, especially when it comes to picking up twists and stunts and blitzes. There's a lot of communication that goes with it. I will say this. I thought the O-line got better in pass protection as the year went on. I honestly felt like towards the end of the season, Josh Hoover at least a lot of the time had a clean pocket where he could throw. Chandler Morris didn't really have that luxury. Now, Chandler also held onto the ball for a long time, and I think his processing was slow at times, and that affected how much pressure was getting there. But overall, I felt like towards the end of the season, they did a pretty good job keeping Josh clean in the pocket and allowing him to make throws. Run game was never really there, aside from a few games against teams like SMU and Houston that they kind of bullied up front. And so that has to improve because Kendall Briles wants to run the ball. I think he wants Amani Bailey and maybe Trey Sanders to be, or possibly Cam Cook, who'll be a sophomore next year, to be a big part of what they're doing offensively. And if you can run the ball effectively, that gives you balance. It allows you to stay on schedule, to stay past the chains. And we saw last season, as much as we lamented it, there were so many times in short yardage situations where they weren't running the ball because they felt like they couldn't do it, right? And I feel like so much of that was just predicated on that O-line, especially in the interior. But who's coming back that can help contribute? Unfortunately, there's not a lot of guys with experience on the roster right now. So you have Ben Taylor Whitfield, who it will be a sophomore this upcoming season. And he played a significant amount of snaps this past year as a true freshman, the Duncanville player. I don't think they expected him to or necessarily wanted him to, but it was kind of out of necessity. And he emerged as someone who could, be a quality player for them. Now, the good news is, even though he struggled on the field, he at least got that experience, so he's got a little bit of a leg up. You have Colton Deary, who towards the end of the season sort of slid into that left guard spot. Now, I think he might end up being your center this year because that was his natural position coming from Maryland. And the staff's really excited about him. I mean, he's another guy, wasn't always pretty, didn't always grade out super well. But, I think there's a lot of upside with Colton. He was a wrestler in high school, highly rated player, spent 1 year at Maryland, was supposed to be their starting center this year, and then ends up transferring to TCU instead. So we got some game experience, and it was at that interior spot, the guard position. It'll be a little different playing center, but that's something they can do. And Michael Nichols at offensive tackle, who has dealt with injuries for multiple years in his career. He was actually the starting tackle to begin the year a couple seasons ago on that team that had that great run, but then he got hurt in the Oklahoma game and didn't really play much after that. So, I mean, I think Nichols is another guy with potential, but the question with him is he going to be able to stay on the field? Sorry about the breathing today. I'm got some allergies going on, maybe a slight cold, and so I'm powering through this. But apologies for any excessive noise. It's hard for me to catch my breath at times. But Nichols is another guy that at least has played and has a decent understanding of college football as a whole. The question is, he's had injury issues for multiple seasons in a row. Can you really rely on him to be available going into this year? And the rest of the guys on the roster really haven't played much at all. Ezra Dotson-Ataye, who transferred in from Arizona State a couple of years ago, and they thought maybe he could play center for them. But, I mean, this will be his third season, and he really hasn't seen the field much at all. So I'm not sure the coaching staff trust him. Maybe another offseason will be good for him. And, I mean, I don't know if he did emerge as a possibility at that center spot, that's potentially helpful because maybe you could keep Deary at the guard position. But I'm not sure what A.J. Ricker and the rest of the offensive staff kind of think about his natural position and where he's going to be and what his best fit would be. But he's someone that hasn't really played much in the couple of seasons he's been here. Mike Stoker hasn't played much at all. Bobby Rochester, Breon Ramsey-Brooks, who was the huge player from Oak Cliff. I think they're still working on getting him in shape and getting him to a place where he can possibly be a contributor. Garrett Hayes, this will be year 4 for him, right? Or maybe year 5, but been in the program a long time, high-rated recruit, never really saw the field to this point. And that's honestly it. I mean, those are the guys. You have some freshmen coming in, but I don't expect these true freshmen to contribute right away automatically. I think it's going to be a challenge for any of those guys physically to step in and be that kind of player. And then a name that I've been asked about a lot, Tommy Brockermeyer, former 5-star player, former number 2 player in I think the 2020 class, maybe the 2019 class. He had back surgery and ended up missing pretty much the entirety of the season. And I mean, I don't know where he's at, honestly. Haven't really heard the coaching staff talk a lot about him. I mean, I think A.J. Ricker gave an update on him maybe at some point back in the spring or the fall. But if he steps in and he can be a starter, that would be fantastic. I'm just wary of a player that, again, has dealt with injury issues, apparently had more injury issues last season, and just didn't get to practice a lot. It sounded like the plan for him was to kind of take it easy, meaning from a game playing standpoint, not be someone that's expected to contribute right away, get his body right, get him healthy, and then potentially this coming year he could be someone that comes in and starts. But, I mean, it sounded like he didn't really hit the field at all, after a few weeks into the season. So I'm not sure where he's going to be at physically and mentally going into the year. So point being, you got a lot of guys that haven't played much in this room, in this position group. So how do you offset that? How do you find ways to get players in the portal who can step in and fill that role? Well, here's some of the players on the O-line that TCU is targeting. And I mentioned one of these guys a few days ago, it was Cade Durham, who is Cade Bennett, offensive lineman for San Diego State. Bennett has been a guard for the past 2 seasons, starting there at San Diego State. He started his career at Oklahoma State and then transferred to the Aztecs. 6'5", 305, a lot of game experience. And that's really the theme that you see with these guys that they're targeting, is these are players that it's at the group of 5 level, but they've played a lot, since they have been in the system and they understand college football and they at least have seen competition at a high level the last few seasons. Also, Brandon Crenshaw Dixon, who was another San Diego State player. He started at tackle for the Aztecs for the past 2 seasons, was a 3-star prospect at a high school coming over from California, and he's been there with the Aztecs since 2019. So experienced player, 2 years of starting football under his belt. Now, one thing that's fascinating to me about the San Diego State guys, Aztecs didn't have a great season. Like Brady Hoke retired, and I put that in quotation marks if you're watching on YouTube, because I I think Brady was asked to leave, essentially. And they ended up the year 4-8. They weren't an offense that was super explosive. Now, I understand they're grading out individual players. This is not about the team as a whole. It's just kind of interesting that San Diego State has multiple offensive linemen that are like really solid players that are getting offers from multiple Power 5 schools when they didn't have like the most amazing year in the world. But I trust TCU's evaluation process. They've hit on these transfers in the past. So we'll see what happens. Another player, according to Jeremy Clark from 247 Sports, that the Frogs are looking at is Carson Bruno, who is part of the Louisiana Tech 2021 recruiting class. And again, he's made 24 starts in 2 years. So another experienced player. I was looking at Carson's social media today. And it's like so far he's got an offer from Maryland, Mississippi State, Tulsa, Texas, and TCU. That's all the ones that he's made public. So I'm not for list in the world, but so I should say a pretty solid offer list. My main point in kind of running that down was nobody on that list that I don't think TCU could beat out, right? Like Mississippi State with Jeff Lebby, they're going to have a good offense. They should have some playmakers. But overall, there's nobody that you think is just going to money whip this guy and get him in the fold. So Carson Bruno, Cade Bennett, Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, all players that have multiple starts under their belt, have experience, and that really seems to be the key. Now, in my mind, if you're going to do this well, like this appears to be, okay, we have to find players that can kind of bridge the gap to our young guys. We've got 2 recruiting classes now that are going to be coming in. This will be your 3rd with heavy offensive line presence. We're trying to get numbers back up in that room. These are the players that are going to take us from point A to point B and allow us to develop those younger guys and hopes that in 2025 and beyond, we'll be in a better place. When we come back, the 2024 schedule is intriguing to me. A lot of people think this is a lot more manageable, which I see the point. But when I look at it, I think it's still going to be tough. Now, in a vacuum, hopefully TCU is improved. But we'll talk more about, who they're playing, what it means. It starts with a game on the road against Stanford. All that and more coming up next. This is Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team, and we do it here every day on the Locked On Network. All right, FanDuel, FanDuel.com/LockedOn. It's the place to bet on the NFL. You can go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn today. And if you make a $5 moneyline bet and you hit on that bet, then you get up to $150 in bonus bets. Patriots, Steelers tonight. Man, that is a Thursday night football game if I've ever heard of one. But you can make it more interesting if you want to put some of your money down. You can do that on FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Again, hit on one of those $5 moneyline bets. Get $150 in bonus bets. That's free money that you can use. You can also download the FanDuel app. It's safe, it's secure, it's easy to use. You can make prop bets, moneyline bets, bet against the spread, whatever the case is. FanDuel.com/LockedOn or the FanDuel app, official betting partner of the NFL and proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. FanDuel. If you want to make some money, go there today. FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Take advantage of that offer and get your bonus bets. Do it now before Patriots Steelers kicks off tonight. So there's a narrative going around, and I don't think this is true, but I've seen TCU fans kind of theorizing and hypothesizing that people are frustrated that to this point there's been no changes in the coaching staff. Not even a change in with the position group coaches. Mark Trombadol, the special teams coach, is still there, even though special teams was a real adventure this year. Obviously, Joe Gillespie was the person that a lot of people had set, in their sights, in their crosshairs, because the defense was such a disappointment this past season. But one reason that I've seen kicked around, that maybe they're kind of staying the course, is, the 2024 schedule with Texas and Oklahoma leaving, it should be more manageable. The new Big 12 should be more manageable. And maybe Sonny just kind of wants to see this play out a little bit more, see how his coaches do. Can you get to 8 or 9 wins and sort of reset? And then once you have your full allotment of guys here with the portal and with the high school class, and you have a better picture of what your roster is going to look like, you can move forward and get it done. First of all, I hope that's not the mentality they have in the coaching office. I really don't like that mentality at all. Like, it's okay to think about, okay, we think we match up better with the teams on our schedule coming up in 2024 than we did this past season. But, I mean, that sounds like almost a group of five mentality to me. Like, the idea that, well, we don't have to have a great defense. We're just going to hang our hat on offense, and we think we can score a lot against the teams that are left and move forward and play good football. Now, I will say this, from a talent standpoint, from like a talent composite standpoint, there are not many teams in this conference anymore, with Texas and Oklahoma gone, that are going to be overwhelmingly more talented than TCU. I would say at this point, there's probably none. Now, like UCF is trying to recruit at a high level. Colorado is trying to recruit at a high level, even though their high school class isn't super highly ranked at the moment. They did land a 5-star tackle today. I think he's the best tackle in the nation. So Deion's still doing some work. And I know, like my friend Tommy Fisher has mentioned multiple times, he just thinks as long as Deion is there, they'll be good. Colorado's on the schedule this year. And Kansas State's on the schedule this year, which has been the school the last 2 years that outside of the big dogs has been giving the Frogs most problems and just wiped the floor with them in Manhattan. But at the same time, I'm just not seeing a lot of automatic wins. You have to go to Stanford, which Stanford's struggling, and we'll see what they'll be. I guess they'll technically be an ACC team next year. We'll see what they look like, what their roster looks like. At SMU, which will always be tough. This SMU team's honestly pretty good, and they played a lot better since they lost that game to TCU early in the season. I imagine that we're going to have an FCS opponent at Baylor, at Cincinnati, at Kansas. Kansas with Jalen Daniels back, potentially. He's got that back injury, but still Lance Leipold's still there. They're going to have to find a new offense coordinator because their current offense coordinator went to Penn State, so some staff shuffling. But then Arizona, who under Jed Fish has been outstanding this season, and he's coming back. Texas Tech, those games are at home, so that'll help. Houston at home. Willie Fritz is a good coach, but you would think in year one, that's a team he should handle. UCF at home. At Utah, which I think Utah, in a similar way to K-State, is going to be a huge challenge because they're just physical and they play hard and they got a great defense and they have a very clear identity with Kyle Whittingham. And they just play good football. Now, I don't know what their quarterback situation is going to look like. I'm not positive Cam Rising is going to come back. He didn't end up playing at all this year. And then Oklahoma State, which is another one of those teams that you would think has a lot of hope and a lot of expectation with the changeover in the league because they're another school and university and program that thinks, well, I just, if we can figure things out and get a little more consistent and continue to recruit well, we could be the big dogs in this conference. So I think it's definitely more manageable, but there's not a ton of just automatic wins that I see on the schedule. And I hope that the coaching staff, I think they've been very active in the portal so far, but I hope they have an edge about them this offseason. And they're going after it. They're trying to get it done because last year, to a certain extent, it felt like they just kind of said, all right, we had a great year. We're going to rest on that. We think we have the foundation in place to continue that. And obviously that didn't happen. So this needs to be a season where you're really getting after it, trying to add talent, trying to add players. And in my mind, it starts, as I said earlier, up front with the offensive line, and they're chasing after those guys. So we'll see if they can get to a place where they're better. And again, you would think in the trenches, you don't have to be as dominant as in the past because you're not facing teams that are as physical up front as Oklahoma and Texas, but you still got Utah on the schedule. There's other teams on the schedule. And so, man, you got to figure this out and you got to get this right. And hopefully that's the message to the team during the offseason, and they're trying to do the best they can to get to a place where they can play better in 2024. When we come back, I'll get to some of your reaction. Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. PrizePicks is the place to go for daily fantasy sports. it's simply betting on stat totals, right? So over under, you can hit those, and whatever the case may be, if you feel like you can get it, then you'll make some money. You can use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. Use that code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. They have NFL bets that you can make. They have NBA bets that you can make. In-season tournament semifinals are going down starting tonight, so you can bet on those players if you like. Locked On, prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. Locked On College is a promo code that will get you a first deposit match up to $100. If your season-long fantasy team is in the tank, PrizePicks is the place to go. Start playing those daily fantasy games and stay involved in that world. Make some money. PrizePicks.com/LockedOnCollege. I also have an app that's super easy to use. PrizePicks, official sponsor of the Locked On Network. Final thing for you. My episode yesterday, I talked about Randon Fontenette and Jonathan Bax, two young defensive players that TCU really likes. They were hitting the portal and moving on. And so what does that mean for this team? What happens moving forward? A lot of you had thoughts on it. Tommy Fisher said, I think 80% of this is just the way things are going in the portal era. I think when they identify a type of player, they need to understand what he's good at and let him do that. If the guys in front of them are struggling, they need to share time with those guys. He did mention he hasn't seen an impressive offer list for either of these players, especially backs. And the real question is, should they be allowed back in? If they are, what precedent does that set? He doesn't think if you hop in the portal, you should be back in the fold. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think you can't really set a hard and fast rule about that. I understand where you're coming from. Bax's offers, I think, so far have been like Louisiana Tech, Group of Five schools. I think Fontenette will be more highly sought after, but I haven't really gotten a feel for what his potential interest would be. I know Clark Lee at Vanderbilt, he was recruited heavily by Vanderbilt as well. Now, Vandy went 2-10 last season, but apparently they've got a lot of NIL money. Like, they've got big-time donations, and they're ready to spend, and they've kind of given Clark Lee the ammunition to go get some talent. So I wonder if that might be a place where he goes. But your overarching point stands. You know, you lose these guys, it's hard, but ultimately they weren't really producing for you on the field last year. I think you kind of have to take it on a case-by-case basis as far as do you let people back. You know, Jordan Hudson hit the portal briefly, and then he came back, but then he didn't have a great attitude in the spring, and then he left again. So I feel like, but once you hit the portal, I just think it's tough to put that genie back in a bottle. Like, I know the players maybe don't think about it as much as we do, but it's just a weird situation. And so I would be surprised if either player ended up back at TCU. That's just me speculating, though. That's not me reporting anything specifically. Jesus said I shouldn't be blaming Sonny Dykes for this. Blame the defensive coordinator and the offensive coordinator for the schemes they're running. They're not working here. Okay, Jesus, but I blame Sonny for those guys for, you know, like, if those guys are struggling, those are his hires. And if you have a problem with the scheme, go fix it. You're the head coach. If you think the players are not responding to the coordinators, then go fix it. You're the head coach. You're in charge. And it appears he's not making any changes. Like, that's my frustration. I don't feel like this comes down to Joe Gillespie. Like, I think that might be part of the equation, but I think this is just more of an overarching thing of these guys are like, this program doesn't seem to be going in the right direction. We're not getting playing time. We're moving on. And ultimately, to me, that falls on Sonny. Like, he hired the coordinators. If he's unhappy with them and doesn't think they're doing a good job, he should let them go. Like, that is his fault in my mind. This falls on him. CJ says some of the guys in the portal are going to end up back at the same school, but in worse favor. Yeah, possibly. I mean, I think these players, TCU's had two kind of players enter the portal so far this offseason. Depth guys, like guys that just haven't played much and are on their third or fourth season, right? And they're looking for another opportunity, which is totally understandable. And then younger guys like Fontenette and Bax and Russell, who, for whatever reason, are frustrated early on in the process and are deciding they want a fresh start as well. But, yeah, players do end up back at their same school and maybe don't get the offers they want. And so that's just how it is. And then William Hill says blaming the coaches is not the right move. Well, and he mentioned the recruiting process, but these are the players they're recruiting. Like, I think the players share some responsibility in everything that's going on. but the coaches are recruiting the players. They're setting the culture. They're setting the precedent. They have to be the ones that take responsibility for these things. We'll be back tomorrow to close up the week. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, and it's your team every day. We do it 5 days a week, available anywhere you get your podcast, and we're always free. Thank you, and I hope you guys have a good day.